a lack of embodiment, and you often talk about coming back for yourself after awakening happens, and not to stop until full awakening comes, because awareness after it's realized will come back for itself and reintegrate into the body and the mind and the personality and other aspects. And at that point, then you're talking about full enlightenment.
That's what I would term full enlightenment. I mean, but like I said, I think the whole subject of enlightenment is the most, the most god-awful confused thing that we could ever talk about, because what people do think of as enlightenment often, and the way that they're moving towards enlightenment often has very, very little to do with what enlightenment's all about. It's actually usually much more about various types of mystical experiences, higher, lower states of consciousness, which are all well and good and entertaining, but they're really sort of meaningless in terms of enlightenment.
Well, you mentioned that you became interested in attaining enlightenment.
Yes.
So that, turning back the clock a bit, when that occurred to you, and I assume you started to read books about enlightenment, and you put two and two together and realized, oh, I'm having this experience that I used to call having a good day.
Right.
And that's really something that's a pointer in the direction of something that is a bigger good day, or even a better day. And they call this enlightenment, and I want it. So it became kind of an object in a way. It was like
most definitely.
There's the term spiritual materialism.
Yeah.
And so many seekers in the spiritual world are seeking to attain, which implies getting something or getting somewhere, going that there's somewhere to go, attaining enlightenment. But it sounds as though you started with that kind of limited conception too.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's one of the reasons it made it very difficult for any true enlightenment to happen, because I would read about enlightenment, especially in the Zen tradition, which I was really drawn to because it seemed to be a transmission from teacher to teacher, teacher to student, and so on, which was really all about enlightenment. It wasn't necessarily about priesthood or carrying on tradition. All that was part of it, but it seemed like the core of it was enlightenment. And I really didn't even know what it was, because in Zen they spend very little time actually telling you much about it. Very little time trying to describe it, and a lot of time trying to help you realize it. So it was kind of funny in that I was sort of captured, my imagination was captured by enlightenment, by the things that so-called enlightened guys and enlightened girls said, and the way they behaved. And yet I didn't have any idea what it was, so I started to chase it, which, it's just a sort of an endless game of tail chasing.
And why is that? Why is it different than trying to attain anything else?
Well, that's the whole problem. Is it usually the spiritual search is just like trying to attain anything else. And that's the whole problem with it. Of course, when it becomes just trying to attain anything else, say, or trying to attain enlightenment, in the same way we'd be trying to attain happiness, or wealth, or a better relationship, or something that we start off working from an image. And when we're working for the image, and we're moving towards an image of what enlightenment is, it makes it very difficult to happen, because enlightenment is really defined by really waking up outside of the entire box, conceptual, experiential, everything that makes us sort of a separate person, which is what the seeker is. The separate person is seeking enlightenment. But enlightenment is literally waking up out of that entire paradigm. And of course, that's the only paradigm we have to start with initially, so that's what we do. And I think my experience was exhausting that paradigm, exhausting looking for enlightenment in all the ways that I could think of to look at it.
In all the wrong places.
In all the wrong places, yeah. But of course, all the wrong places ends up, if one really follows it through to be all the right places. I mean, in other words, there's nowhere to look for enlightenment but is in illusion. There's nowhere else to look.
Yeah.
If you're not in illusion, then your looking is sort of stopped.
Yeah. Well, that's why some teachers, including you, say, just stop.
Yeah.
And that's one approach.
That's one
There's
approach.
the exhaustive approach,
Right.
which you got involved in.
Yes.
And then the just stopping everything approach, which is very difficult especially for the Western mind, because we're so used to attaining through trial and error and try again. And you were a competitive bicycle racer, so you must have had that kind of approach.
I had a very
pretty
masculine approach.
Yeah.
Yes. Storming the gates of heaven, an act of will. I would, just meditate for hours and hours and hours, and it was really an act of will, which wasn't really working, but that's how I was going about it for quite some time.
The spiritual warrior approach.
In the same way that I would we used to go about it in the world of athletics. Tell me what the most successful people are doing, and I'll add 10% onto that, and that'll work.
But in this case, you had to subtract 10%.
Yeah.
Or 99% or something.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you didn't realize that until you had exhausted all the heavy-duty spiritual warrior approach to your practice, and meditating more than anyone else did, and trying on spiritual personality for size.
Well, for me, it really accumulated in a moment of utter and absolute frustration. And I mean, literally into a point of absolute frustration when I was 25 years old. And I had been working up to that point of frustration, literally feeling like I was going to go crazy at any moment, or have some sort of psychological break.
Out of frustration?
Out of frustration, actually. Out of pushing so hard and wanting to know the truth so deeply, that I was just pushing myself. Literally, like 24 hours a day. I was very functional, going to work and taking care of life and everything, so nobody would really notice it from the outside, but inside, psychologically, I was pushing myself to such an extreme that I was even sort of waiting. I wonder when this psychological break is going to happen, because I felt like I couldn't sustain it for an indefinite period of time, and yet I knew I wasn't going to back off.
Was it the activity of searching itself that you couldn't sustain, or the frustration of not attaining what you had set out to discover?
My sense was just so psychologically, I wasn't going to be able to bear up under the pressure forever. And that's why I was almost waiting for some sort of psychological break. I didn't have any doubt that I could keep pushing myself to that point. In fact, I knew that by that time I really didn't feel like I had much choice, because at that time the whole spiritual urge was something that was tremendously powerful. Much bigger than I was. It was almost like I had gotten on a train by mistake, and this locomotive was going where it was going, and if it was going to go drive me into insanity, I didn't really feel like I had a whole lot of choice in it.
Did it feel like an obsession then?
Absolute obsession. A total obsession. Yeah.
And so, can you describe the nature of the culmination, the epiphany, or however you would describe it?
Yeah, well, it came down to a particular day, and I was sort of working on a very traditional Zen koan. It was, the koan called Mu, and Mu has to do with the story of somebody asking a relatively spiritually inconsequential question, whether a dog has Buddha nature, and the master yelled out Mu, which translated roughly means nothing or nothingness. It doesn't really matter what the word even means, but you're just told to concentrate on it until you almost crack it open and you realize what that is. So you have some direct experience of what it is. And here I was kind of working on it. I had actually given it to myself. My teacher hadn't really given it to me, but since I kind of was very masculine, I wanted something to crack open, some object of which to, to just sit there and meditate and hope something